Hello, phenomenal human beings. It is Queen Levine back for another episode of Historical Baking with Miss Levine. That's my new intro. I just copywrote it? Yes. So, welcome everyone. It is great to have you back. I know it is Friday. It is the weekend. It is almost April vacation. And even though it feels a little different to have vacation when we've been out of school for over a month now, it will still be a good time to pause and just kind of take care of ourselves. Self-care is so important. And again, my form of self-care is baking, especially when it's historical baking. What could be better than that? And also thinking about how now I get to break Passover for the last week. As I mentioned in the last episode, I was making flourless cookies because I wasn't eating bread or anything with flour or any type of grain for the last week for Passover. It ended last night, so I'm super excited to make the most flourly, chocolatey, decadent cookies, which is perfect for today as we make our 11th president of the United States, James K. Polk, and his chocolate caramel fingers. Now, I have made this recipe before, but it's been many years. You can tell because my cookbook pages are kind of messier than some of the others. Definitely some stains from previous recipes and previous baking adventures. But I'm super excited. Works out perfectly for this delicious chocolate caramel fingers to break Passover when this week we learned about James K. Polk, this dark horse, or was he, and the Mexican-American War. So just to read to you a little bit more about James K. Polk. So again, he was the 11th president. When entering, President James and First Lady Sarah Polk were less extravagant than their predecessors when it came to entertaining. They did not always offer food and drink at official receptions. When the Polks did offer refreshments to guests, they often served great pyramids, ice cream, and ladyfingers. Meals were kept simple, reflecting the taste of the first family and their desire to live within their budget. The Polks are noted for hosting the first annual White House Thanksgiving dinner, which is super interesting since Thanksgiving wasn't even an official federal holiday yet. That didn't happen until the Civil War in 1863. The Polks also installed the first gas lights in the White House, replacing candles and oil lamps. Super interesting, James and Sarah Polk. All right, so today we're making chocolate caramel fingers. So it says no cookie recipe can be traced directly to President and Mrs. Polk. However, the James K. Polk Memorial Auxiliary published the James K. Polk Cookbook to honor the first family and to create, let me move my post-it, an interest in their style of living and entertaining while in the White House. A delicious recipe from the cookbook is chocolate caramel fingers, rich bars swirled with chocolate chips and dusted with powdered sugar. Oh, I'm so excited. Like before, I'm going to half this recipe so I don't have too many of these decadent chocolate caramel fingers to eat and then later in my freezer. Need to keep a balanced meal during this quarantine, but I am so excited to make these. So you need 2 cups plain flour. I'm using 1 cup, 2 cups dark brown sugar. Again, I'm halving that. A cup of butter, which is 2 sticks. I have 1 stick melting right here in my pan. It's almost melted. Perfect. 2 eggs, a teaspoon salt, 2/3 teaspoons baking soda, 1 teaspoon baking powder, a cup of semi-sweet chocolate morsels, and powdered sugar at the end to dust over our delicious caramel chocolate fingers. All right, first step, you want to preheat your oven to 325. Mine's all preheated. I have my pan that is ready to go. It is greased, it is floured, so perfect. All right, the step after that is to melt butter in a large saucepan. Perfectly timed. My butter just finished melting, so now I'm going to stir in my brown sugar. So I'm stirring in my 1 cup of dark brown sugar. Oftentimes I don't think it makes a difference if you use lighter brown sugar, but I think in this recipe it does. So as I mentioned before, James K. Polk, the 11th president of the United States, he is often known as being a dark horse, somebody who wasn't seen as being in the running for president, but came out of nowhere to win the nomination at the Democrats' convention in Baltimore in 1844, before the general election in that fall. Now, my sophomore year of college, I went through a James K. Polk phase, which is totally normal, right? Everyone goes through their James K. Polk phase. And I wrote a research paper on him where I argued that he actually wasn't a dark horse, that he'd been planning for this his whole, young political career from everything that he did. From getting involved in the Tennessee state legislature where he was from, and then going off to Washington, where he was a congressperson and then Speaker of the House. And when he realized that no other former Speaker of the House had then been president, he went back to Tennessee and was governor. He did lose a governor race after being governor, wasn't reelected. So might have not looked great for him, but he was still able to win the nomination for a variety of reasons, which I'll talk about after I do the next step of our recipe. So I melted our butter, I stirred in our brown sugar, and now we're gonna add slightly beaten eggs. I'm using 1 egg because I'm halving the recipe. Look who's back! It's Egbert! Our loyal baking buddy is back. So I'm going to slightly beat this egg using Egbert, my baking buddy. So once this is slightly beaten, just gonna put him there. All right, I'm going to add this slightly beaten egg to my brown sugar and melted butter mixture. And then the next step is to add our dry ingredients. So I'm going to mix this all up. And then I'm going to add my dry ingredients once this is all mixed. All right, so the thesis of my research paper was I argued that James K. Polk was not actually a dark horse in the nomination process because of his experience, which I just talked about, but also because of his close connection with Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, also living in Tennessee, was known as Old Hickory, and James K. Polk was known as Young Hickory. They had a very close relationship, and Andrew Jackson really training him to become president. Now I'm going to add a cup of flour. And my other dry ingredients, I got my salt, baking powder, and baking soda all mixed in here. So going to mix that all up. I'm going to turn my heat off because the butter is melted. But it is kind of nice that you don't need multiple pans for this recipe. It's like a one saucepan recipe, which is awesome. It makes it a lot easier. So I'm just going to keep mixing up. Oh, look at this carameling. Right, caramel because you have your butter and your sugar. And then I added my dry ingredients. This looks amazing. So James K. Polk's relationship with Andrew Jackson, his political experience, and his position on Texas, right? We talked about U.S. history students, the annexation of Texas, and how other presidents didn't do that even after Texas became their own republic, the Lone Star Republic, from 1836 to 1845. Well, James K. Polk said he would annex Texas, which he does, soon after he becomes president and wins the nomination, beating Henry Clay. Oh, I always kind of feel bad for Henry Clay. He runs for president so many times and never wins. Oh, poor Henry Clay. But I don't agree with his political slogan of who is James K. Polk. Maybe not the best mark getting Henry Clay. Well, James K. Polk wins soon after he annexed Texas, and as we talked about U.S. history students, we have the beginning of the Mexican-American War. So as I mentioned before, history is complicated, and people in history are complicated. When I researched James K. Polk when I was a sophomore in college, and I was really interested by him, thinking about how he was one of the few presidents who, when he ran for president, said, I'm going to do these 4 things. I'm going to get Oregon. I'm going to get the Southwest Territory for the United States. I'm going to fix the tariffs, and I'm going to create an independent treasury. So he claimed he was going to do these 4 things, and he did them. One of the presidents who did everything they promised they'd do. He also said he would only run for 1 term, serve those 4 years, and then that would be it. I think that helped him to get elected too, because he wasn't necessarily worrying about re-election. When he was serving president, people knew, all right, he said he's going to do 4 terms, or 4 years, 1 term. After that term, he said he stepped down, and he did, and he actually worked so hard during his presidency that he died very soon after leaving office, because he almost basically worked himself to death. However, again, people are complicated. You can look at all of his accomplishments. He did everything he said he would do, but at what cost? And the cost that he actually did this at was quite horrible. When you think about how he started this war against Mexico under somewhat false, kind of shady circumstances, saying that American blood was shed in American soil, when really that was disputed territory, and that many people, including the Mexican government, recognized the Nueces Progressive border, not the Rio Grande. And so when he sent Zachary Taylor and his troops in in that area between the two rivers, and a Mexican patrol charged at them, like, was that really on American soil? Kind of no. So the fact that the Mexican-American War was very much a war of conquest, led by James K. Polk to take this land from Mexico and increase the United States, is something to think about in history and to really grapple with that. And what does that mean? James K. Polk is this expansionist president who's also, like many other presidents, a slaveholder. So yes, he was effective, but at what cost? At what means did it take? And reevaluating him there. And thinking about, okay, he did a lot as the 11th president and really shaped our country, but it wasn't always good things if you think about the costs it took on other people. And again, history is complicated. And it's important for us to remember that even it's while we're enjoying these amazingly delicious chocolate caramel fingers. So there's my main history lesson for the day. I'm going to add my chocolate chips, right, as my recipe tells me to. So stir in chocolate morsels last. I'm going to stir these in, and then I'm going to pour my batter into my prepared pan. Now, if you're making the full recipe of this, and as always, I will post the final product and the recipe on Schoology. Oh, these just smell so good. I'm going to kind of try to show you what this batter looks like. Looks amazing. If you're making the full recipe, make sure you use a big enough pan. You want to kind of be able to spread these out. So this actually might be too big, but I'll make it work. So yeah, if you make the full recipe, this pan might be the right size, might not be. The recipe calls for like a larger casserole dish, but these look amazing. So I'm just gonna use a spatula and spread this out, and then put them in the oven. And I'm so excited, and it's so easy. So I've made this recipe a few times. Every time it kind of comes out differently. Sometimes they're more like brownies, sometimes more like blondies. This one, it seems like the chocolate kind of melted right in. But I am so excited to eat these decadent chocolate caramel fingers. And after you bake them for about 20 to 25 minutes, when they're still warm, you want to sprinkle some powdered sugar on top, and that just like takes them to the next level. All right, so I'm spreading out my batter, just trying to make it even. Oh, these look incredible. They smell really good too. I'm so excited. I'm just like so excited to eat flour again. It is great. All right, so oven preheated at 325. Here we have our chocolate caramel finger batter. Doesn't that look delicious? Of course it does, Miss Levine. All right, there we go. Checking our recipe one last time. So I'm going to start it on 20 minutes. I'll check it after that and see how they look. As I said, after they bake 20 to 25 minutes, do not overcook. The top should appear glazed. The testing toothpick should be almost dry. So you take like a toothpick, stick it in the middle, almost dry, they're good. Immediately you want to brush them with powdered sugar, let them cool, and then you're gonna cut them into strips. So this says for a 12 to 17 inch roasting pan. If you're making the full batch, I used a 9 by 13 because I made a half batch, which was just about the right size, maybe a little big. As always, I'll post a recipe. I'll post a picture of the final product on Schoology so you can see this later. Thank you all for joining me for a wonderful history lesson on James K. Polk. Again, I have this whole book. My mom gave this to me. Shout out. Hi, Mom. I know she watches these. But it really makes you grapple with people in history, right? People are complicated. I think that's the lesson we get from James K. Polk. We don't always talk about him the same way we talk about like a Washington or a Jefferson or a Jackson, but he has that same type of, how do we remember him in history? Oftentimes we don't remember him, right? Walk up to somebody and say, hey, who is James K. Polk? And they might be like, I don't know. But yet he's the reason why California, Texas, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, parts of Utah, or Nevada are all part of our country. But again, at what cost? So those are the things we need to think about when we study history. All right, everybody. Vacation is next week, so I will not be making a video, but I'll make some more after that. I hope you're all safe, healthy, and happy. That's the most important thing. Have a wonderful break, a great weekend, and get baking. Bye, everyone.